Y'all, I am KM Best, and the July cards just got data mined. So what I'm going to do in this video is go over the June cards and the July cards, and then talk about which ones I think are strongest and which ones I think might be worth saving tokens for. Because as we all know, we do expect very exciting cards. Living Tribunal is going to come up next week. Obviously, High Evolutionary at the time of recording is still not out. So there's going to be a lot of tension in terms of what is a good idea to buy. What I am also going to be doing is keeping in mind that people are going to be comparing these cards against Iron Lad and Jeff, most likely. So I will keep that in mind in my comparisons as well. I do want to jump right into it, though. So we're going to start with the Season Pass card from June, Ghost Spider. Now, Ghost Spider looks like a really useful additional piece to move decks, and frankly, I already think move decks are pretty underrated. There's a guy who is in Infinite who constantly plays move, and right now specifically, move is quite powerful because you can pair a wave with a cloak, and thus set up a situation where your move deck will present so many options to your opponent that it becomes almost impossible to actually figure out what you should do other than retreat. Now, the cloak is so important to this because you can play it along with wave on turn 5. And because wave is such an important anti-Kitty Pride piece, you get to sort of free roll this in the deck. So Ghost Spider upping the reliability of your early game is, I think, a very useful thing to have. So for example, you go Vulture into Craven or Ghost Spider Craven. That could be your 3-4. That's an extremely powerful play. Ghost Spider, I think, is going to be genuinely worth it if this kind of deck remains. Like, if this remains a relatively plausible play, Ghost Spider could actually make move decks legitimately powerful in the future. Another great synergy with Ghost Spider is Dagger on 4. Phenomenal. Just more things that are good in the deck, because your early game being a little bit iffy is the biggest weakness of the list, and you do need to keep that in mind. I think Ghost Spider is likely to be a very useful card in the metagame, and hopefully a card that does for move what MODOK did for discard. Next up is SpiderHam, who can turn one of your opponent's cards into a pig, meaning effectively that it neutralizes the on-reveal and ongoing abilities of your opponent's cards that it hits. Now, it only targets the highest cost card, but for some decks, that is a linchpin card. So if they only have a Dr. Doom, turning off that Dr. Doom with some reliability is a very powerful thing to do. Now, his stat line at 1 cost, 1 power is not going to win you a ton of games, but I think a lot of people are really excited for this card, and frankly, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if this was one of the cards that the Second Dinner devs have mentioned may cost only 3,000 tokens instead of 6,000, because I think it's the exact kind of card that if it costs 3,000 tokens, people will actually be able to play around with it, but at 6,000, it's asking a lot for a card that is so unique and so different from what we've already seen that might not actually be very good. I think this is a card that at 3,000 is a reasonable consideration, but at 6,000, I would simply stay away from. It's something that needs specific context to thrive, but in that context is one of the most powerful things you can do. Obviously seems uniquely powerful in the context of Beast and Falcon. Given how strong the Kitty Pride decks are, this could be a legitimate player in that deck, and I think that is the place where I would want to be playing it. Imagine you hit enough stuff in your opponent's hands. The issue is it's only ever going to hit the highest power card, right? So it's not like it'll work like Iceman and go down to the next one if you've already turned it into a pig. You're never going to actually turn like Wave or Darkhawk into a pig. That's not going to happen. It's going to hit the highest thing. And that's fine, but not as useful bouncing as you might expect it to be. I do think it solves some problems for that archetype, but not enough or all of them. But there is sort of an open slot for a disruptive card in a lot of those bounce decks. I wouldn't be surprised if people tried this card. Next up is Spiderman 2099, a card that I am actually pretty excited for. And I can already hear people getting mad for calling it Spiderman 2099. I'm sorry, Spiderman 2099 is a card that I'm excited for, although I don't know if it's actually going to be so much incredibly useful as the threat of it is going to be useful. This is a card that demands you play around it in some certain specific ways, and there are going to be contexts, there are going to be metagames where a card like this is going to be a really useful thing to have in the move deck. Killing your opponent's units is an extremely powerful thing to do. You notice in the discard deck, it's on a card like Gambit, which is gated by having bad cost and bad power for the cost, and it also comes with the cost of discarding, so you have to build around that. But here, it comes with the cost of moving. You effectively get a free Boom Boom whenever you play Heimdall when you play this card. You can even play something like this in a Zabu list, which is remarkable, and it has an incredibly decent stat line. At 4/6, it's just a good unit to play, so you don't even need to be having it go off every time. You can just play it and benefit from the threat. I'm excited for this card. I am like, the fact that it's a 4/6 is super interesting, honestly, especially in the context of maybe we can fit Zabu in the deck now. I don't really know, but move decks get to do a lot of powerful things, and this is one area in which they struggled, and now they are able to do some spot removal, or at least get to some 50-50s in terms of blowing something up and trying to win the game that way. So Spider-Man 2099 does have the limitation of only working once per location, but there's only so much you actually have the ability to move a 4-cost card around anyway. Like, it's not like you're going to be moving him a ton regardless. You're usually only going to get like 1 or 2 kills out of the guy, even if you could remove that line of text. So personally, I don't know how much that changes it for me. I do think it, like, opens up more lines of counterplay in terms of now you know you can't get Spider-Man 2099 here. But I still think that, like, most of the time you're going to get a certain amount of kills out of him. The real risk is that counterplay, which is once you blow your wad with the 2099, they know it is safe to play there. They can't get 2099 again. But I think that would be the case most of the time, because it's not like you're moving this card more than twice. Like, you go like Ghost Spider on 5 and then like Heimdall on 6. You're still only moving it twice, right? Like, it's still not happening a ton. But, like, by the way, that playline, Spider-Man 2099 on 4, Ghost Spider plus Wave on 5, Heimdall on 6 seems like just a ridiculous thing to do. I'll just throw that one out there. Just ridiculous if you can pull it off. Finally, I think the card most of the competitive players that I know about are excited for is Silk, but me personally, I actually am a little bit more excited for Spider-Man 2099. Silk is a really unique card in the context of what it does. As a 2/5, it will instantly be one of the strongest 2-drops in terms of pure power, and there are not a lot of 2-drops at that level, so it automatically slots into, say, for example, a Sarah deck as a final turn play. A 2/5 is just really good numbers. Definitely a thing you want to be interested in, but after any card is played here, this moves to another location. So you get free Miles Morales activations. I guess my question is, what is the downside of including this in your deck with Miles Morales if it's just always going to be moving around, always going to be making Miles cheaper, and it's a 2/5? Like, you're not sad to see it exist. The issue is, to what degree can you control the randomness? And with only 4 spots on the board, I think you can control the randomness fairly well in a lot of these decks. I am definitely interested to see, especially like in an actual move deck, this is like on the left, you play a Heimdall, you move it over to the right or the middle. Like, just some really interesting stuff can happen with this card. It's gonna catch people off guard. It has a great stat line, and the ability reads as a downside, but it's not as much of a downside as you might think. I am genuinely excited for this one. I think it is going to be a very powerful 2-cost card. Although it only does potentially go in certain kinds of decks to mitigate that downside, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw this being a relatively impactful card. So that is it for the Spider-Verse cards. Those cards are going to be coming out in June. Personally, the one I'm the most excited for is Spider-Man 2099. I would say the one I'm the most excited for is Ghost Spider, but since she's coming out in the Battle Pass, I'm just going to be buying that anyway. But if I had to say it in order, Ghost Spider, Spider-Man 2099, Silk, and then SpiderHam are the ones that I'm the most excited about. I am especially interested to see what happens with them now dropping cards into Series 4. I think that is super unique. So in this context, though, I don't know if any of these cards end up better than Iron Lad. I will say that. I think if any of them have the potential to do so, Ghost Spider and 2099 do. Iron Lad just sets the bar so high that I think, me personally, I would prefer to have Iron Lad now than to save my tokens for any of these cards, especially with Ghost Spider on the Battle Pass. Of course, I do not know what their plans for future downgrades are, so obviously you have to take that with a grain of salt, depending on how long you think Iron Lad will stay in Pool 5, how long you think it'll stay in Pool 4. I don't know. So now let's move on to the July cards, and these have been data mined, and this is actually going to be the first time I'm ever looking at them. I have never seen these cards before. I remember maybe like a couple of them might have been data mined in the beta, but this is going to be actually like a first reaction kind of thing here, so I'm definitely excited to see what we're going to be getting here. Normally, I don't spend a lot of time looking at cards that are happening in the future, but I understand people want to budget their things properly. Their tokens. Why did I say things? I don't know. People want to budget their tokens properly, so that is important, so I'm going to be giving my opinion on this, but I've never looked at these before, so you're actually watching my first reaction to these. So the Phoenix Force says, on reveal, revive one of your destroyed cards and merge with it. That card can move every turn. It's a 5/5, so it's like Graveyard Hulkbuster. So, like, on balance, if there is a card that has been destroyed, this is going to be better than Vision, is my first thought here. This is just going to be a card that's better than Vision, as long as you are able to blow your own stuff up, or if any of your stuff dies. The question is, how often is that going to be happening? Like, is this actually, here's a thought, right? Like, what if you, like, blow up, okay, you Venom something, and then Phoenix Force it back? Like, that. What about Deadpool? There's interesting stuff here, right? Like, there's like, why are you playing a Vision and Destroy deck? Because I think Destroy decks are going to be like these sort of mid-range type things where you actually would want a Vision. There's like some interesting applications for this, but I think the baseline assumption here is, do you want to be playing the card Vision? And if you do, then you might want to be playing this card and introducing a Destroy sub-theme to your deck, right? If you're like a curve-out mid-range Destroy deck, or if you're a curve-out mid-range deck, it seems like introducing a Destroy sub-theme to your deck could be like a really interesting thing to do in the context of this card existing. Like, you're carnaging stuff away, you're carnaging a Yondu away, Death just got made a little bit cheaper. This is the kind of thing that makes me wonder if there's something there. Like, that's like a really interesting card for a sort of mid-rangey curve-out kind of list, and I am definitely interested in that. I do think, obviously, it's pretty good if your stuff gets Shang-Chi'd, but most of the time people are Shang-Chi'ing in the end of the turn, so not exactly the thing you want to be doing here. So my baseline for this card is it goes in like something mid-rangey, and if you can get it to go off in something mid-rangey, it's really interesting. And if I can't think of anything that's like reliable enough to like actually break it, though. Something that's gonna like actually be nutty with it. But I do think this is like a very solid incremental advantage kind of card if you want to play it that way. Jean Grey. 3 cost, 3 power, ongoing. Players must play their first card here each turn. Oh, that's so weird. That is the kind of card that can ruin some decks. That is the kind of card that can ruin some decks and be absolutely useless against other kinds of decks. Like, for example, this card is complete trash against the Thanos list, but it is really, really good against a deck that wants to play 1 card per turn and spread power. So that is really interesting. I think that is likely to be like some sort of tech option, but it's also super possible that you just put her in whatever and build your deck around making her downside not a downside. Like, if you're a Thanos list what if you just run this card, right? Like, what if you just play, like, curve out Thanos, right? You have a bunch of garbage to put in the Gene lane, so you get to attack the other lanes. There are already some really interesting, like, Thanos lane lock decks that are kind of tooling around without, like, a big hammer. And I think this could be a kind of interesting hammer, right? Like, if you're playing, like, Thanos lane lock stuff, this feels like a great way to make sure that you get to attack other lanes and you get to attack this lane. This is a really interesting card, and there's a ton of application for it. I think it could range anywhere from tech card to, like, genuinely great. But, like, if it is a tech card, it kind of ends up in, like, it can be anywhere from, like, rogue to legitimate build around would be how I would conceive of this card. Anywhere from rogue to legitimate build around is pretty much what I think about this card. There are so many interesting things you can do with this, and it is such a disruptive effect to certain decks. Echo! 1 cost, 2 power. After your opponent plays an ongoing card here, remove its abilities. The endless war on ongoing cards rages on, chat. That is really interesting, because there are a lot of situations against the Darkhawk Zabu decks where you're like, okay, I would lose to a Darkhawk in this lane, and that's the only lane that I actually have to worry about the Darkhawk in, and that's the one they're going to put it in. That's really interesting, but I have noticed recently that the floor for playing a blank piece of cardboard here colloquially being used to mean card, the floor for playing a card that is blank a lot of the time it's actually pretty high. That card better be doing something insanely powerful, insanely often, or you're usually going to be better off running something that is, right? So we look at Nebula. Look at the 1-drops that see play now. Nebula, Kitty Pryde, Iceman, Korg. These are cards that are basically always good, and there's a reason why cards that are not always good are not seeing play. I do think that Echo is probably the strongest of these 1-drops that's like a tech for a specific thing, but running, like, I don't exactly know how to explain this. I think these kind of cards get designed with the idea that because they are 1 cost, 2 power with upside, that makes them easier to run. But I think it actually makes them harder to run, because you end up being down on card economy just by running a card like this instead of a card that actually impacts the board in a real way. Like, if this were a 3-5, I would feel like it is an unbelievably good card. But instead, it's a 1-2, and it's hard for me to want to put a 1-2 in any deck that I make. And I think the idea behind these designs being 1-2s is that it should be easy to put them in your deck, but I think it actually might make it a little bit harder to put them in your deck. Like, if this was even a 3-4, I feel like I would be more comfortable playing this card, especially in the context of, like, Silver Surfer and all the weird tech cards Silver Surfer gets. I just don't know, because it's like, you also need to play her with Cryo, and it's like, okay, look at Negasonic and then bump that up a little bit. If you want this card to be splashable, I feel like you need to make it like a 3-5 or like a 2-4 or something, because at 1-2, she does her job and she does it well, but you're going to be kind of running a card that is not good a lot of the time in your deck, and then just drawing that card and realizing it does nothing for you is worse than if it actually had a body that you could curve out, right? Think about, like, how Enchantress at 4-6 was really good. It's sort of the same principle there. Just having a body, minimizing the downside risk is, I think, pretty important. And I guess I worry that with this card, running a 1-2 that does nothing 70% of the time just isn't something people are going to want to do. Mirage, 2 cost, 2 power, on reveal, copy the lowest cost card in your opponent's hand into your hand, give it +2 power. That is a unique ability. So obviously it has synergy. Like, I guess the comparison I would like to make would be probably like Maria Hill. This looks like better Maria Hill would be how I would phrase it. This is like a Maria Hill that you actually consider playing. It's not like it's going to be getting you good stuff most of the time, but like if that's a 1-4 Iceman, that's a great pull. Kitty Pride, obviously, you could pull that, and you're often going to be able... No, you're never going to be able to pull that, because they're going to play the Kitty Pride. It's never going to be in hand. But, like, there's definitely a lot of interesting things you could pull off of this. I think this is better Maria Hill, and the question is, how much better is Maria Hill? Or how much better than this is Maria Hill? Because I think we all know Maria Hill, not a very playable card, especially after the Quinjet change. But this, I mean, you sacrifice 1 point of power on the front end to gain 2 on the back end, plus you get the information of what's in their hand. Plus, like, you know, a lot of these bounce decks end up playing things like, you know, Mysterio and Hitmonkey. They dump their hand. You reveal this, you get the Mysterio or the Hitmonkey. That seems pretty compelling to me. I'm interested in this card. There's definitely some things you can do with this. I don't know. Like, it's the kind of card that's like, if it is good, it's going to be sneaky good, where it's just going to be like innocuously really powerful if it ends up being good. And if it doesn't end up being good, it's going to be Maria Hill. So like the range here for me, I think, is somewhere between Maria Hill and like really important in specific mirrors would be how I would think of Mirage. I also just kind of wonder, though, if she's just not like a generically amazing 2-drop. There are a lot of very mediocre 2-cost cards in Marvel Snap, and I think her competition a lot of the time is going to be something like Sentinel. So is losing a power on the front end and copying one of your opponent's cards better than playing Sentinel? I would think probably not. So yeah, her range is Kitty Pride to Sentinel-ish, but Sentinel is like legitimately one of the best 2-cost cards in the game. And this card has like specific applications that'll be sort of matchup intensive that I think could make her genuinely good. But yeah, her range is Maria Hill to Sentinel. It's interesting. I would say it's an interesting card. And the specifics of matchups are going to be what determines how good she actually is. Oh, man. Legion, 5 cost, 7 power. On reveal, replace each other location with this one. Wow. That is a crazy effect. That is so weird. Like, first of all, at 5/7, that's not like the worst stat line you've ever seen either. Like, how often is this going to be relevant, though? Like, I guess my question would be, how easy is this to deck build around? And I think that's the issue. It's pretty hard to deck build around this in such a way that you can reliably say Legion is going to be a good card, right? Because what you want to do, like, one way to this would be really cool is if there was, like, you know, maybe there's a maybe there's a card that creates Necrosha, and then you play this in a Luke Cage deck to make everything Necrosha, right? But I think as is, it's the kind of card that's just going to be, like, hard to predict and thus hard to include in your deck and account for in deck building. So what I mean by that is when you put cards in your deck, when you build a deck, you usually have a goal for the deck. You want to accomplish something specific. And Legion is so unspecific as to be hard to manage. Hot Location card is a great read for this, I think. Like, if we are looking at a hot location that is abusable, making that hot location everywhere really does change your deck building. This does seem like the kind of card that could be a hot location all-star, depending on how you want to be playing your decks. Like, that's the kind of thing that I think this card would actually shine at. But in a normal game of Marvel Snap with no hot locations, no featured locations, I think he's hard to deck build for. Now, he does have a reasonable stat. 5/7 is genuinely not as bad as you think it is, but it's sort of just hard to throw him in your list. Well, I guess, okay, here's the thing. Here's the pitch for throwing Legion in your list, is that nobody will play around him, and if you get someone, you'll win a ton of cubes, right? Nobody's going to play around that guy. But it is sort of a unique effect, and it's not that bad on rate. So maybe you'll see, like, some streamers just throwing him in their good cards deck. I think that's, you know, the kind of thing that could happen. I think he's just a very hard card to play around, just as he is a very hard card to deck build for. And that information asymmetry, I mean, you know what you're doing with Legion and your opponent doesn't, is probably his best case for playability. Where you get to play this Legion, and yeah, sometimes it's not doing anything, but when it does do stuff, you know that and they don't. And that can inform your entire game plan without informing them of anything. And you can really blow people out with this. This is a really cool card. I think it's super sick. I don't know if it's going to be very good, but it's definitely going to be like swingy. And it's the kind of card that, if it is good, I think is probably bad for the game. Like, if this card ends up being like metagame defining, we don't want to be there, I think. But it is a really exciting and interesting design. So I'm definitely excited to see what comes out of that. In terms of these cards approaching Iron Lad level, which is how I've been going through all of this. In terms of these cards approaching Iron Lad level, I don't know that any of them do. In terms of these, like, I think the one I would be the most excited for, the one I'm most excited to explore is Jean Grey. Because that is just such a restrictive ability, and you can throw her in Thanos and sort of, just by virtue of deck building, have an advantage over your opponent. But I would think that none of these cards approach Iron Lad, would be my guess. I don't exactly know, but I would think that looking at these, I would feel safe purchasing Iron Lad and or High Evolutionary if that's what you want to do. These look like super exciting cards. And obviously, you know, if you're a Move fan, you're going to want to save for the Spider-Mans in June. The July cards are a lot more disparate in their effects, and you'll be able to pick and choose which one of them you want. So I do think on baseline right now, Iron Lad is still a good pickup. And I do think that none of these cards stick out to me as like, oh my god, I have to save for that. Just cards I want to see if they're good and explore and play with. Spider-Man 2099, Ghost Spider, Jean Grey, Phoenix Force if I can figure it out, but I think those first three are the ones that seem like I know what to do with them the most, which is not to say they're the strongest, but they're the ones that strike me as the ones that, like, if you buy it, you'll know what to do with it. And that's an important thing, especially in the context of, you know, being able to evaluate how good something is. So I have been KM Best. I hope you found this useful. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. As always, please, 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 like, subscribe, dopamine chemicals, all of those things. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next one. Have a good one.